Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Maynard, and I'm a dark web researcher and ransomware bounty hunter. So, for a little bit of background about me and what particularly that I do, we have to talk about, for me, I have almost 20 years of IT and InfoSec experience. I've worked in various industries such as healthcare, insurance, manufacturing, IT, and I'm a former ethical hacker where people paid me basically to, breach their defenses and as well as educate. And that was the best part about the job is whenever we got into, this particular type of work that we were able to educate people about why their defenses were breached and how to fix that. And it was something that we kind of did for a while about how to make things better. And it was one of those things I kind of took away, as soon as I, left that position. Um, but having done so, I've had a very diverse background into dark web research, and that is where a lot of this bounty hunting and getting into things kind of started to transpire more and more because it was that hidden part about our industry that we weren't able um, to get into, and it was something that kind of felt like it was missing from our industry. So the more and more I got into it, the more and more I started to see more and more about threat actors and what they were doing, especially when it pertained to, basically for ransomware and exactly what was transpiring. And one such case was where I got into a dark web forum, which was known as breach forums. And everybody knows about that being a dark website where it had a lot of information on breaches and a lot of information on stolen information. And it was this place where ill and repute and all these terrible people could go. And it was the very first time I got into listening how threat actors were getting into places that they were. And it was also that one point where you're able to actually see people on both sides of that spectrum. You had the threat actors who were doing all the terrible things that they were doing, and then you had people who were doing other things as far as like the business perspective. So you got both sides of the story to watch, and that was something that I had never seen before because you had the threat actor was boasting about what they were doing and how they were able to obtain that data. And then you had the business side where it was hearing their version and what exactly had transpired during that time. So it's kind of like a mix of who to actually believe and what side to go on and what was, on the table and what was off the table. And it gave a unique perspective about what our world was heading to. And so with the mix of knowing all that, there was a program called the Trip Bounty Program, which was Halcyon, which is a anti-ransomware platform, wonderful company, wonderful people. And this was a year that they actually opened up a bounty program, which I, just mentioned known as Trip. And the Trip Bounty Program is basically where um, researchers or cybersecurity researchers can take part and their intelligence. So if you were, looking for certain things about ransomware and how it, kind of went into perspective of the IOCs that you would get if you got a locker or if you got, just any type of useful information about ransomware, you could use it to basically collect a bounty, that they would analyze and look at and kind of go from there. And it was a great program. And at the time, I already had a pretty good idea about where, a lot of these actors were going because of my, research into dark web and stuff like that. So it was definitely a journey as far as, looking for things because at the time it was just for me, I was just looking for a way to fix my doors and how to collect a large amount of money at one time so that way I could pay for my doors, my stairs, and also have a little bit in my pocket for like family trips and stuff like that. And that's how it all originally started because I didn't really think at the time there was going to be a whole lot that I was going to get because it just seemed like a tale that was going to be so hard to to get into the end because I wasn't too sure exactly where a lot of the threat actors would go at that point because if you even had mentioned ransomware at one point, you would particularly be banned for it. So it's kind of like a taboo topic to some degree for many different groups. So, that was definitely something that was interesting to get more into. But as time progressed, like I said, with breach forms being taken off, from its seizure and stuff, I lost a lot of valuable intel, but it was also beneficial for me because there were a lot of copycat sites that were being opened up. And that's beneficial to us because, there was some discussions in dark web forums that it was the FBI setting up different sites to capture more criminals. Some say it was former affiliates and other groups trying to get back at one another. So there's a lot of tug of war going back and forth. And so I kept an eye on things. And then there was a site that opened up that claimed to be, another particular case for breach forms. So having said that, I investigated and I saw a thread. And when I say thread, and a thread is on a forum, it's basically just like saying help wanted. So that's all it means. And so I had a person who was actually asking for ransomware as a service affiliate interviews. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And with the trip program open up like it was, I thought it would be a really great place to start. And so, like many jobs, especially on that we know of, and especially pertaining to this, there was an interview process, if you will. And this is where I started to interject a lot of my human intelligence, workflow, social engineering, a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes, um, discussing this one-on-one conversation with a threat actor. Common questions were just if I had previous experience in any type of ransomware, what other crews I'd ran with, my experience with tools, my experience, and else, if I was from a CIS country, and that's a common independent, well, state country, so it would be Russia and things like that. That was very big in the topic because they didn't want anybody to attack those regions. They wanted people to be from those regions. So it was really in depth in that conversation. And so as time had progressed, I was actually able to be accepted and, got into the group at that time. And what I didn't know is that for this thread that I was getting into, this group didn't turn out to be a group till later. It was just one person and it grew into one of the most notorious groups today, which, I can't really give a whole lot of detail about it for cases and stuff like that. But having said that, getting in was one thing, and then I was able to have a conversation more and more about things, and eventually I was able to obtain their encryptor, which is basically the malware that locks you out of your company's data and they extort you for money. And that was a win for me because that meant I was going to end up, you know, trying to collect a bounty. But things started to get interesting because it went from a bounty to a sense of duty and a sense of fighting against these threat actors that not a lot of people do. It gave me a rare advantage that I'd never seen before, and I don't think anybody else has either. But after that, I was actually invited to join another business platform that we use um, every day. Those business platforms used by threat actors as well. And once I joined, the conversation went into this whole business metrics that I'd never been a part of in a group ever. And the threat actors had basically set up this business portfolio of attacks as far as who was listed. So once you joined, you'd have 5 or 6 members of that group you never met before. They all had aliases, stuff like that. And it was like your boss was checking in on you, asking about where you were, what you were up to. And it was just going through this big business meeting on destruction. And it was just at that point, it was just there was so much intel for just one person to have. Like in my case, it was just, there's too much power and too much information to just obtain and just walk away and just claim, take part in a bounty and then just leave. And it just got to that higher purpose where it was taking all the information that I had and then giving it to the right people in government to say, this is what's going on and this is how we're fighting and we need help. So that's basically the gist of what I do every day. It's just getting in with groups, finding out what I have, giving that intel to government agencies, whether it be here in the US or outside the US. So that way we could get this advantage because as InfoSec goes, there's only so much information that we get post-mortem or we get malware analysis, and that's okay. But having human intelligence and being able to actually get inside groups and get real-time intel is very valuable because we could be able to detect attacks before they happen. We could be able to tell what's going on within that group before they actually transpire. So there was a lot going into that. So working directly with ransomware cases and bounty initiatives, we've talked about the bounty initiatives that are going on. As far as I know, TRIP is the only one that I've been a part of. It is the only one I've been a part of. It's the only one that I've seen. But working directly with, ransomware cases, it's different daily as far as what group you're getting into and what exactly that looks like. Most of the time when I work with the groups, the one thing is there's a lot of listening. And that's the biggest part of that work. I took an effective listening class to learn how to listen better because as an industry and how we are as people, we listen to respond, but we don't listen to listen. And the more I invested that into this type of workflow, the more you started to gain from the groups as far as knowing that they were just people trying to do illegal things. So it's like I never condone anything that they did, but when you analyze the person more and listen to what they had to say and why they were doing what they were doing, gave you the advantage because you could unmask the threat actor and just see a person. And that was more valuable to me than anything else. The second part was learning to negotiate, and that was interesting because you do get to some points where they have conversations with you and they want to know certain things, or they'll push you or they'll test you. And so that was something I was not prepared for. And most of the negotiation methods I knew was from a show called Pawn Stars or anything like that because I didn't know anything else, and that was it. So, I read Chris Voss's book, and he's a former FBI agent, hostage negotiator. And the effective listening class I took was also from the perspective of a hostage negotiator. And I figured what better way to kind of understand and communicate with threat actors. So that's what I started doing. And it's been significantly great. It's been at least 15 plus groups so far as far as collecting intel and giving all that information to government agencies and anybody else who's willing to join the fight and work with, defense on this. But those are really particular great roles that you would see because the groups just got diverse more and more every day. You have a lot of them who are just in the shadows who won't work with you. So there's some groups who are so locked off that they only work with people within their group who are referenced from other people. So if you knew somebody, the only way to get in is to be, referred to by them. The other groups you have to offer like $10,000 or more to get in to use their stuff. And then there's more other groups who are just about, accepting anybody if you have the right amount of information. So each group was so significantly different that, preparing for them was almost impossible. So it was just really about trial and error and going through and learning about what each group did. And when you learn that, it got you to do a little bit more with each one because you have to get it's okay to be, accepted with failure, but it's also, well, it's better, you want to be associated with a lot of success, but if you don't learn from failure, there is no success. And so that was a big thing too, is that just because you're really great at it, and just because you're good at all the skills and stuff, there are some groups that just will not talk to you at all. I've got more no's than yeses, but that's the part of the game. So, the importance of collaboration between researchers and government and industry is a big one too because when you do this type of stuff it is really hard for researchers to work with certain entities because distinguishing friend from foe is really difficult and it's a very big risk especially for the stuff that I do because nobody really knows who you are and if you present this information to certain people and stuff and you don't do it through the right channels and you don't document everything it puts researchers like myself at a significant disadvantage and unfortunately for industry, it's 2025. And, the reason why I started doing more and more of it was because, we've been doing the same stuff for I don't know how long. I don't know how long we have to have white papers published and conferences that we attend to. And the biggest topic is patch management or network segmentation, stuff that we already know. It's just, but it's getting to that point of what will change, what can change. And that's the important part about research and having a lot of this um, take place is because it gives us the advantage that we never really had. I mean, I don't know how many times we waited for hope that never came, waiting for something that would make a change, and we just keep rolling with it, and nothing really kind of changes. And so having this collaboration between us and agencies and everything else really kind of helps out because it's valuable, because like I said before, most of the stuff they get is like it's post-mortem. There'll be a new ransomware strain that's come out and there's a malware analysis on it, what to look for and stuff. And that's great, but they change significantly. I mean, malware analysis and all these different types of uh that they develop, it changes. And so it's very difficult to stay ahead, especially with updating and rebranding. So having said that, the research perspective is where we have a unique point, and that's where we actually can study the person behind it. We can study the groups behind it. We can study why they do what they do. One case that I work on right now is about an individual who, works for a very large company, and he approached this new group that nobody knows about, and they have access that they want to trade. And the reason why they want to trade all this information and company secrets, big emphasis on that, is, it's an insider threat model that we know of. It's where people from your business and everything else say that they just, they're unhappy. And that's the biggest thing is that we start to see is that the person who's unhappy in their business tend to do things a little bit, that are not good. In this case, the individual was really upset because they were being laid off in a few months and they didn't think it was fair. So you'd think it would just be something that would just be made up, like you would just hear that in a, you know what I mean? You get a lot of those security talks and everything else where it's just you think it's made up just to sell, or you think it's made up to just that time. But it was that first moment that I'd actually been a part of something that was a major insider threat, and it was just because they were unhappy about being laid off and they would rather make money and go to jail than deal with anything else. So that was a lot that we started to take into, account is that the motives behind it, the human side. And that's not really spoken a lot about in a lot of these cases when it comes to ransomware groups and how they think, because we've been taught for so long that they are just, it's us versus them mentality. And I don't even think that's our mindset anymore because it's just something that we've been, fed for so long as far as like fearing ransomware operators and stuff too. It just really don't the reason why it's so important is that we can start to say, I think that they should be afraid of us as much as we're afraid of them, because we need to flip the script a little bit, to that point to where we could actually start doing more. Because I mean, you say the name ransomware and you start to get that pit in your stomach and you start to become afraid because your business goes down and there's a lot of issues there. But you start to wonder too, is it really how you're thinking or is it how the industry has been saying things for so long? So it gives us a little different of perspective when it comes to, that particular, mindset. And that's why it's so important to have government and industry and researchers all in one particular goal. It also helps whenever you have so much intel that you need to get somebody because time is of the essence. So when you get a particular case or a particular group who's actively attacking healthcare, and that happens a lot, and some groups it's actually forbidden to attack healthcare or children's facilities and things like that. It's always that big taboo topic that they don't like. But there are some groups that are so desperate that they flip the script and they'll say one day that they're attacking hospitals and they'll say we're attacking on the holiday. So there's so much intel that has to be done quickly. And usually, how productivity and stuff goes, where it's, tips for certain companies and tips for government, and it takes a long time for that intel to get to the right person. And that's a real big drawback in a lot of the research and stuff that I do because, like I said, if they have access in their environment or if they're going to be doing things, during that week, and holiday week's a very big one too. So it's like for the upcoming holiday for us in the US, you have Thanksgiving coming up, and there was one group that I was actually investigating. That was the big disclaimer for the entire chat that day is that we attacked for the holiday. And they would go through a list, and it was a 260 some page list of VPN credentials. And the project for that day, we're back to business analytics during that time, and they would go through each line and try and determine which particular VPN had MFA on it or not. And so that was one thing that was pretty interesting is that, we had this big, thing that was going on. So I sent all that intel and everything else to government and anybody else, who could help because that is a perspective too from a researcher is what do you do with that information? As I said previously, it was a lot of information for somebody to have. I didn't want it, but then too, it was really difficult to who to send it to and the amount of time it was going to take to actually act on it. So, I sent it to everybody I could because like I said, it's important for all of us to work together because that type of intelligence starts to become a little bit stale, after a while. So, the quicker we can work on it, the easier it is to kind of move things along a little bit. Strategies for organizations to proactively defend against and respond to ransomware threats in today's evolving landscape. I get asked that a lot. And for the most part, I can say to kind of talk about that is I don't do graphs, I don't do statistics, I don't do a lot of things in my talks because I like people to get me the way that I am. You're gonna get me in my raw form, you're gonna get me in every aspect. I'm not gonna work on buzzwords and things like that to talk to you about what you can do for your company and how to change things because every every group that I can talk about and everything that you can do is every attack that I saw started with the initial access broker. And for those of us who don't know what an initial access broker is, that's somebody who has access to your network either through phishing, malware of some unpatched vulnerability. Somehow they got in, they have access to your system. And those particular people reach out to ransomware operators because they either run a service, which is basically an operator who has the ransomware developed and they lease it out to people. It's a business, it's a big business, and that particular person wants to make money. And so when he reaches out to the ransomware operator, since he already has access, he will lease their product and then he will basically encrypt your network and he'll get 80% of that, and the ransomware operators get 20%. So there's a little mixed scale about how much you're going to get versus what they get. But in the news articles that you read, you'll just see Kalen or you'll see all these different people or these different ransomware groups who take down a business, and that's what you'll see is, that they took down your network, but actually it's the initial access brokers who were in your system before anything else. And they're the ones who walk away and they're the ones who nobody will find because you don't that doesn't sell a whole lot, so you just hear about the ransomware groups and that's it. Um, so to on that, the best thing I can say is the same stuff that we've been talking about year after year, and it's the same things that we've known that we still kind of fall behind, and a lot of it would be like I said before, they worked on the group I was on, they went through like a 260 some page report and they went through to figure out what account had MFA on it. You'd be surprised in 2025 how many accounts still don't have MFA on it because it's hard to push all that through, but also through your vendors as well. And your vendors shouldn't be no different than what's going on in your environment. There's been, I don't know how many breaches I've reported to certain companies that I found from dark web forums, and their accounts are listed in the dark web forum, and they talk about how they don't have MFA on them. I send those lists to the companies anonymously and, I never hear anything back, but that's one thing that they do as well. Another thing is your recovery point and your recovery time objective. I don't know how many times we have companies who go through and they say that they have backups and they test them. It's like, okay, great, check mark, you're compliant, your regulations, everything are good. But then when you get hit, it takes weeks and months to recover. And that's where your recovery time and your recovery point objective come in place too, because you can have backups and you can test them. But when time comes down to it and you actually have to restore a server, you have to restore something, that takes time. Incident response and going through and figuring out how somebody got in is great. That's how you can patch your vulnerabilities and you can fix what's broken. But the part that saves your business is the recovery point. And that's where a lot of your budgeting should go. That's where a lot of your focus time should be because if something goes down or something doesn't work, you have to recover quickly to keep business going. Or worst case scenario, treat your patients and provide a service that could mean life or death. And the last part is your cyber insurance expectations because attackers who will, encrypt your network, and then you get to that point where you don't know what to do, and so you reach out to insurance, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do. And sometimes it gets down to negotiating with somebody you don't want to negotiate with. And I could imagine being in that room with somebody who has broken your business, you're down on your luck, you've got no money, and you have to negotiate to have them not sell your data or post your data and, go from that point. And that is a really hard situation because you're putting trust in somebody who, has broken you. And so a lot of people don't really think about it until they're sitting there behind the table and they have to talk to somebody about it. In a lot of cases, people think just because they have insurance and that says, guess what? We have a negotiator for you, and they'll negotiate. If that comes down to it. I've found at least two groups so far who have said if they find out that you have a negotiator, that they will never give you your decryption key and they will sell your data. So there was a really unique take on that I hadn't seen before that they would take that route, but it was definitely in there. And when you get down to that point too, they know everything about your business. They know everything about you. So if you try and fabricate a little bit, they will find out. So, and it also gets that perspective about what your business wants to do if one of these groups do get your data, because some groups will just, or some individuals will, I'm not shaming anybody at all. So I want to definitely say that is that you pay the ransom so that way they don't post your data. And they'll say, well, we'll delete it and after you pay us. And so you pay them and then they delete your data. I never really understood that part. I never really understood that you pay, I get that, but then trusting them that they've deleted it. Most of the groups I know, like once your data has left and they have it, it's gone. You're never going to get it back. And then trusting them is a bad idea because once it gets to that point, seeing your data is gone is the best option for you. You can't really negotiate with them because you'd have to trust them. And I don't see how you could trust somebody who has broken your network and stolen your data. So that was something I didn't really understand. There was one company recently, and I can't think of their name, and they refused to pay the ransom. So they basically made an apology about what had happened, and that was the best thing for the business, and they were just going to have to work at it and gain trust and build their company. So instead of paying the ransom, they actually took what the amount the ransomware operators were asking and instead invested in it in cybersecurity research to get rid of ransomware. I thought that was the best situation ever because it pushed more towards the agenda for us researchers and everything else, where we could actually work on understanding more and pushing towards that agenda. So that's pretty much what I have as far as, what companies can do and kind of go from there. I do have a question. So I mean, if you want to, you can keep those rolling through too, and I can kind of walk through those as well. So Jeffrey Rodriguez, how does one maintain their persona when working with a cyber criminal organization? That's a very good question. That comes down to a lot of OPSEC, and OPSEC is basically where you're going to you have to prepare yourself before you go into it. So for people who want to get involved in stuff like this, I say don't because it's a very treacherous path. It's like when you get into this type of work, you'll see things, you'll experience things, and it's unlike anything in the world. For me, working with the criminal organizations that I do, it starts with OPSEC, and that always starts with how do you protect yourself? And you have to know, first thing you have to know is what you're getting into. Do you have family? Do you have children? Do you have that aspect of maybe if something had happened that you won't be able to walk away from? So it's something that I do worry about sometimes too. It's just, worrying about staying hidden. So it starts with a lot of things. It starts with your operating system and the Tor network. For me, I use Tails. Tails is wonderful because it pushes everything through the Tor network. From that point, there's a lot of creating fake personas. That's where AI, so I can touch a little bit on AI, if talk a little bit on that too, is when you work with these groups and stuff, I use a lot of tools that AI has helped me out with, and that is changing the way that I talk. So I have a certain program that I developed with it. So I put things through a converter and it basically changes the language that I use, the phrases that I use. Also, I create some personas for who I am. So I'll create a name, a backstory, stuff like that. And that in itself is pretty interesting, because like you have to change things each time that you talk to somebody. So there's that too, and a lot of it is trial and error. I actually learned a lot from threat actors more than anything else because they roasted me a lot of times when I would get found as a cybersecurity researcher. So there's a lot out there for really good OPSEC. So a lot of it starts out with the core basics, and that's your operating system, run everything through the Tor network, proxy chains, everything that you can. AI helps out a lot if you're having any issues with certain things because there's not a lot of people to talk about this research. Um, I have another one too. Has there ever been situations where you may had to cross a line ethically to not be compromised? And the answer to that one is no. Usually in a lot of cases where if a situation arises where they push me ethically, which has happened quite a bit, and it was I never touch anybody's stuff. So when I come into a ransomware group, I've been very fortunate enough to not actually have anything actually transpiring. So it's just been, they've attacked or there's been something going on, but I've never touched anything. I've never like sold anything. I mean, a lot of the times you'd be surprised. The best way to gain intel is to just sit back and not say anything. Because usually the people with the big bravados and stuff like that are the ones who get caught a lot because they start talking and talking and talking and you get found out. But no, I stay back and I just kind of watch what they do. And if they start talking about attacks and things like that, I have contacts in some high places and I start to send emails and text messages. And documentation is really important. So we go back to the first question too, is like you document everything because when you get in these gray areas and stuff, you have to be sure to prove your innocence and do the best you can with everything because that's really your best bit is to go through and document. But there's been a lot of cases where it's been kind of gray where they're just, certain groups are doing things, but for the most part, you're in ethically, you stay ethically, you don't touch anything, you don't do anything, you just sit there to observe and report, and that's pretty much how that point goes. Um, so I don't have any other questions coming in. I can say for the most part, for this particular type of work, it is beneficial because there are a lot of groups that we know of, but it's the groups that we don't are the ones that are really good. The one story I could tell you really quick is a story about how I met John Wick, and I know how that sounds. Um, I never met John Wick in person, which is probably a good thing. It's a story, so or it's a movie for most of us who don't know. Um, when I met John Wick, he was on a thread. He was on a forum and stuff, and he basically had um, a thread asking about for people to work for him so he could spread his ransomware, which happens all the time. But it was through this human net workflow that I was able to have a week-long conversation with somebody who I'd never met, and it was like we were friends, just talking back and forth. We weren't actually friends, so it was really, really sad for him. But you have to keep that narrative going because you have to make them feel like they're valued, that they're trusted, that they're powered, because that's how you really need to get in and get the intel. That's the best way to do it. So Mr. Wick and I had a week-long conversation. And then by the end of that conversation, he handed over his locker, which would be used to encrypt people's networks. He included a video of how it works, and all the different tools and stuff that he used to develop it. He gave me his file as far as his README text is what a victim would get. So if you did get hit, it would have, what to do, who to message, and how it operated. And the last part, why this research is so beneficial, is he gave me his decryption too. So I got the whole package just for a conversation of listening, being nice, making him feel valued, making him feel empowered. And once I got all that, I sent it to, the government and anybody who would have it just because the groups haven't had any victims yet, that's really good because that means, they're attempting to get people to do those crimes. So we catch them early, so that way we do have decryption and everything else, and that's a huge win because that means if there are victims and nobody talks and nothing gets public, that first victim, if the locker hasn't changed, can have free decryption to get out of their business, and we could possibly use that for further updates and stuff in their locker as well. So that was one question, or that was one thing I'd had that was pretty fun. How much planning do these criminals organizations do when selecting a target that promises a large payday? They do a lot of planning. They're very, very thorough when it comes to planning an attack on a company. They like I said, a lot of them they'll say like healthcare, and a lot of them will go through Zoom info is very big. They will go through Zoom info and try and see if there's a lot of companies that meet their pay range. Some of them don't. Like if you um, some groups, if it's below like 5 million, like they won't do anything with it. If it's 50 million and above and more, they want to work with you and they won't work with you. They want to, target you for a promise of a large payday. So the bigger, the better. Some of them are really, really exaggerated on their prices and stuff. I think there was one group that had like a 90 million ransomware or ransomware demand, and it was kind of crazy, but they know everything about you. So if you ever get compromise and stuff like that. They've been scanning you, they've been working on it, they've been doing their homework. They're very sophisticated, they're very good at what they do. So even though I talk negatively sometimes about the issues and stuff like that, like I said, they're very good and very professional about what they're doing. It was actually very, very shocking to see the stuff that they were doing. Do most criminal organizations operate or do they clash with one another to attain promising targets? That's a good one, Jeffrey. You're doing really good with those questions. So most criminal organizations do not play well together. They do see each other as adversaries. It was one of the unique perspectives that I'd seen doing this is that it's twofold. So the first part is there are a lot of them that they talk trash on one another. They don't like one another. Um, there's been a lot of forums that there's one that I'm investigating right now where it's actually ran by um, a particular ransomware group. And periodically you'll see other ransomware groups comment and post threads on their forum, which is it's open to the public, so you can do it. So you'll actually see these groups go back and forth and talk about how, you know, um, how do you say it, how dulled down the ransomware is, and they'll just go back and forth about how they hate one another and why they hate one another. And again, that's also bringing us right back to why this research is so important because while they're sitting there arguing about who's pretty and who's not, you're sitting there writing down all these details and stuff so that way you know going forward it's like, okay, well, this person said this person said this person said that their encryption is used with AI, which they say that it is. So it's there's so much there. So they're fighting and arguing, and you're just scribbling down all these notes so that way you know exactly what's going to transpire in the near future. But the second part to that as well is unity, which is weird because you wouldn't really expect a lot of. I always thought that in the land of ill and repute and total destruction, that these ransomware groups would like join forces because you want money and destruction, right? But that's not always the case, but in some cases it is. There's a lot of groups recently, especially in today's, in today where they've actually joined forces under one banner. So there'll be like 5 or 6 ransomware groups under one banner. And a lot of that is kind of still unknown right now because I haven't been able to figure that out. But you can use they basically if you work for one group you get access to a lot of other group stuff, so you get their tools, you get their targets, they work together so that way they can profit more. So it's changing dramatically. Another reason why research and trying to work with government entities and stuff is so powerful right now because they're getting bigger, they're getting more desperate, they're evolving, and so we should as well. Is it true that most criminal organizations imitate typical corporate environments to blend in? Yes. Yeah, that's definitely, it's definitely a thing is there's a lot of that going on where, you know, certain threat actors will try and get in or they'll try and get hired or they'll try and work with certain entities or they'll claim that they're HR. Yeah, it's definitely the insider threat model that we've all known about for a while, trying to get in more because, our systems are getting better, especially with AI. And of course, trial and error is also our biggest thing where we've been doing this for so long that we are getting better at backups, we are getting better at detections, we are getting better, and but so are they. So they stick to other means as well, and that's trying to get hired or try and work for a certain company, and then they try and trade that information. Because if you get hired, think about that. Like there was this one more story, I swear. There was this one group, it goes right with your question. What had happened was this particular insider was trying to trade his information and sensitive information for profit. The one thing that he did that puzzled me, and it was from the insider threat perspective, is that he was trying to coax the group to create a phishing email with what would you call it? It's basically, it's a Trojan, that they would work with, or something that they could, an info stealer, that's better. So he can just sit there and monitor the network. And so to avoid suspicion, he didn't want the group to send the email to him that he was going to have him have that group send an email to one of his coworkers, and he was going to try and manipulate them into clicking it. And that was his idea behind it. So he worked there, he communicated with the group, he had a plan, and that was it. He was just going to get this other person to click the email. So we kind of think about that too from a phishing perspective in a business environment where, so and so clicks an email and we're like, oh my goodness, Frank, you clicked that email and you downloaded ransomware and then it got all over the network and now we got a problem. But we never really thought about the fact that he may have clicked the email, but it was probably somebody else in his group that was behind sending it. And that was something I'd never seen before. So I was really perplexed by that, but it's also intriguing to know that that had happened. Are there situations that criminal organizations threaten their victims to get their payment by approaching a regulatory agency so that they can be fined for a large amount? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that going on where it's like I said, criminal groups get desperate and they want to make sure that they're getting profit because a lot of companies don't pay despite being infected. There's a lot of negotiation logs out there on GitHub. I recommend everybody kind of go through those and look them over because you never really see what that negotiation looks like. It's kind of not public knowledge, but there's a big movement now where there's a lot of these chats between, you don't know who the companies are, but you know who the ransomware groups are. So there's a large files of everything in it, and you click on the different groups and you can see how they negotiate. And that's really important because you could see successes, you can see failures, you can see the human nature of the threat actors and how they do negotiating. And that's very big because the more you learn on how they operate and talk, you learn more about them and how you can kind of go with your research and stuff. But in a lot of cases, you see failures. And that's where the government agency tries to get them to pay and they say no or they just don't pay. And so other methods that they have to try and figure out is who to call. So it'll be, a group will call a CEO or they'll call, in a lot of cases too, ransomware operators are calling families and they're calling people who are, if you're at a hospital and the hospital gets, breached and stuff like that, they'll call patients and they'll say, hey, we have all this information. You need to go. And then they'll get patients and they'll get the public's pressure on the company and try and figure out what's going on in the company has to decide more. So they'll do everything and anything to get paid because that's all it's about. It's all about money. It's all about trying to, get paid, and there's nothing off the table for that. So are there available resources that organization security teams can see what recent ransomware attacks occur in their industries aside from new articles? So, for me, I can give a little bit of information as far as like the resources that I use so that way I can keep ideas on, what your business is about. So for me, a lot of my concerns are always healthcare. And that's not because, I work for a healthcare agency. A lot of it is because I've had friends and family who have needed medical care. My father passed away from cancer, and I have a lot of family members who get sick and they go. And so that's where my heart belongs because it's just people who want to go and get treatment for whatever is going on in their lives and they're trying to get well. They're not there because they want to be, they're there because they have to be. And so whenever some ransomware operator hits a hospital or they hit something with healthcare related oncology or whatever, I take it very personally and you make my list. And so in order to kind of get an idea, there's X, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it nowadays. Dark Web Informer is a really great source because they're constantly coming up with new ransomware groups that have been hitting certain industries. Ransomware Live is a good one. Ransomware Look is a good one. Those are my big threes. They're the ones that I always kind of keep up to date on because, when there's targets that are going on and things like that, and you can even sort out through Ransomware Live, Ransomware Look, you can actually go recent post, but you can also go through businesses and groups and stuff like that, and you can learn more about them. A lot of it too is Googling and going through different things about who targets you and why. But I can say from an organization security perspective is not to focus on certain groups and attacks. The biggest thing that you have to know, and everybody else has a very difficult time answering this question, and that is, do you know where your data is? Do you know where it sits? And that's the biggest thing too, is because if you know where it is and you know where it's leaving and you're focusing on that, that's the biggest thing. Do you know where the keys of the kingdom are? Do you know? Because data is money. And as long as you know where your data sits and resides, it's a lot easier to start working with the groups who are after it because it works in every group. So, it really doesn't matter to a certain degree about what group is looking at you because your data is what they're after. So as long as you have DLP and a lot of purple teaming and things that are going in place to figure out where your data is, it's a little bit easier to kind of keep that narrative going. Do you believe national security agencies around the world are making efforts to cracking down these cyber criminal organizations? How could organizations assist with this effort? So you got to believe, right? Or at least I do. Um, they always say the darkest is before the dawn, but it's been dark a while. And sometimes at the end of it, you think, it's sunlight, but it's actually a train coming. And I mean, that's a fair assessment because it just seems like I said, it's 2025. And, if you talk about ransomware and things like that, you get that pit in your stomach and you feel alone. And that's why I started doing this more and more is because, I like people knowing that you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. And for secure or national security agencies, I can tell you when, the first time I reached out to an actual government organization was the scariest part of one of the scariest parts of my life because the stuff I've been doing is a gray area and stuff, but then also it's just if we don't do the things that we're going to do or try and end this, I don't know who's going to. I don't know how this is going to look, but I do know for me, I'm doing something. And I said, I can't be the only one. And so when I reached out to a government agency to say, here's what I'm doing, and I have valuable intel and I want to help, I want to help do this. And I didn't think government agencies or security agencies really cared about anybody. And maybe they don't, I don't know. But I do know a group of people who do work for some, national security agencies, and they are wonderful and they do care. I get emails and text messages, whenever I do the work and I work with them as much as possible. And there has been, and I swear to you, there has been more times than I can count where people will tell me, it's like, you think you know more than the government, or you think you know more than this. And I've actually sat across the table from somebody who worked in the government, and they said, yes, you do. And it's not to like build up, to your ego and stuff. It's to create unity. And it's like, we all are in this together and we all need to work together to make it because it's just we've been doing this for so long. There's got to be hope, and I always believe that they do their best to crack down on criminals. When I was um, doing intel for on breach forums and stuff, there was so much stuff going on every day. It was just data breach, data breach, data breach, and Intel Broker was the biggest person on that platform during that time. So when he came into the room, everybody knew. And when he would talk about how he was breaching defenses and how he was it seemed like every day it was just scorched earth. And I always wondered, where are the heroes in this? It's like, and then a few weeks later, the whole website went down and you got the big FBI sign, and then there was arrest made, and I'm like, there they are. They're there. And a lot of times just because you don't feel like they're there and stuff, I can say they just a lot of times they just work in the shadows and they do what they can do, and that's it. They only know what they know, and that's why research and teaming up and trying to make this work is so wonderful because you're not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is we just kind of feel we're not getting anywhere, but we are. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it anyway. So how does one maintain their sanity and mental health when covertly working with criminal organizations? That's a very good question. For me, a lot of it comes down to the mindset, and the mindset is very, very, very important to have equipped. Why are you doing this? My wife is very, very good about being outspoken about all the wrongdoing and everything else that goes on in this world outside of the infosec community and the stuff that I do. She's very into helping people and wants to make a great change, and it's infectious, because it's just something that you want to do. And I was made for this. There's nothing else that I'm good at. So when I was able to hold my very first Ninja Turtle action figure, I knew that I wanted to help make a difference. I knew that I wanted to fight and help people. And that's why I got into the business I'm in right now. It's why I do what I do. And the sanity and mental health part, a lot of it comes to downtime, silencing and just knowing that I don't ever expect to be rid of ransomware ever, but I do know that I've drawn my line in the sand and this is where I am. This is who I am. This is what I want to do. And I know every day it will, there's going to be trials, there's going to be tribulations, it's going to be difficult. But I know that every day when I get up and I take a step at a time, that I'm stepping towards that direction of having an end and helping people. It's kind of like saying, it's like you get the products and stuff where it says 1 out of 100 people were cured of this illness. And people will say, well, that's 1 out of 100, so we're not going to be able to move forward on that. It's 1 out of 100, so like that one person's life will change. So that means doing this work is like if there's one business out there who benefits from this, or if somebody down the road 10 or 20 years from now hears about the work I do and things I do, that's a win for me. And so for me, I look into the faces of my wife and my children. I drink coffee and watch the sunrise and sunset, and I take a deep breath every time. And I just take a step and just keep pushing, because they're people just like we are. And that's pretty much how I do my sanity and mental health every day. I laugh a lot. I live. It's not something that usually when I'm done at the end of the day doing it, I hang up my coat on it and I just enjoy my life. And I know that sounds kind of hokey for some people, but that's where your true happiness and your true mental state is gonna save you more times than anything. Well, I mean, other than that, I don't know if we have any other questions coming in or if there's any other things that people want to ask. So I can say for teams trying to monetize their ransomware response and one practical AI driven workflow that we can get into. And I never was a big fan with AI, to be honest. It was something that when it came around, I'd seen too many Terminator and John Connor and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I didn't like it. But I can say as I've worked with it and stuff, I've learned, it's not a cure-all, but it definitely helps us get to some places where we need to be. And it can be beneficial in our environment, not a one fix everything, but in conjunction with some things, what it basically comes to, a workflow as looking for exfiltration. That's the biggest thing I can tell anybody is your lateral movement and how they get in and stuff is great, but they have to move your data. So in order for them to be profitable, that data has to leave your network. So that's usually the biggest frame I can say. So like if you see something on your network using rclone or curl or a lot of these tools that they're using every day, you could Google and do your research and purple team it. And the purple team is basically where a team of people pose as the threat actor, and they'll go through a list of tools and stuff that they use. So you know what they're using, so you have to use it. Even Sun Tzu says that in the art of war, you have to know thy enemy. And so the more you know about them, the more you can replicate in your own environment in a safe way, but be ahead of it. And that's where, an AI-driven workflow can help too, because, business is booming and security is kind of like trailing behind it. But, but knowing what they're doing, and you can drive that AI a little bit more where it says, hey, we've detected our clone in this environment. Hey, we've triggered more bandwidth being used right here. This one person has, opened up so many files over a short amount of time. That's really suspicious. And those are some things where you can start to implement more and more when things are moving in that direction. So I know a lot of people want different answers and stuff for that, but I always thought, they can get in and infect you and everything else, but that data, if it starts leaving your network, that's a really big sign that somebody's there or somebody, may not even be a threat actor, it might just be a insider threat. Somebody's trying to leave a lot with, leave with some data too. So that's always a good sign to look for as well.